Hey folks, and welcome back to another episode of the Daily Racing Show here at RacePlazaMedia. My name is Pia, and today let's talk about the top 5 moments of round 16 of Formula One. The guys competed this weekend at the Temple of Speed in Monza, Italy, and what a race it was. It was definitely a little bit unexpected at the end, but I'm not going to get there quite yet, so stick around for my final thoughts on the race. But let's get into our very first top moment or highlight of the race. Of course, it was the start. Going into the race after qualifying, we knew Lando started in first place, Piastri second, and George Russell in third. So the question was, will Lando have a good start this time around? And he did. He had a great start. He tried to block Piastri, and then he was trying to defend off George Russell. George Russell got stuck right before the chicane, so he had to take the long straight where he had to rejoin the pack after the chicane. And then the unexpected thing happened. In turn 4, Piastri battled with Lando Norris and was able to take the lead in a beautiful, beautiful overtake. Probably one of the best ones of the season, dare I say. And so Piastri took the lead in lap 1 from Lando Norris. Immediately, of course, that caused a lot of talking, a lot of debate, because why are the McLarens allowed to race? What are the rules? Are there any team orders? Because we know that Lando is still in the fight to win the driver championship. Of course, McLaren, the constructor as a whole, is competing for the constructor championship, and they're very close to taking it. But Lando has a little bit more of a fight ahead of himself to win the driver championship, or take the driver championship from Max, who is still leading by quite a bit at this point. Oscar Piastri doesn't really have a dog in that fight. So people were wondering right from the get-go, is there going to be team orders? Are they just going to let them race? But we'll get into a little bit more of that later on. Highlight number 2. There were lots of moments with Haas happening this time in the race. Of course, if you've been watching this season, Nico Hülkenberg has been doing quite well considering. And then on the other hand, Magnussen has also been a great team player, but he's been collecting penalty points left and right. So what happened at Monza? First off, Nico and Yuki Tsunoda collided. Then Yuki and Danny Ricciardo collided. And then Magnussen and Pierre Gasly collided. So that meant first Nico Hülkenberg got a penalty for his collision with Yuki. Then Danny Ricciardo got a penalty for colliding with Nico. However, because he didn't serve the penalty appropriately, one of his crew members touched the vehicle at the pit stop. Instead of giving it the full 5 seconds at first, he had another 10-second penalty added. And then for the third collision, Magnussen ended up getting a 10-second penalty for that collision with Pierre Gasly, which added another 2 points of penalty points for him for the season. So that means he will not be joining us for the next race in Baku. In the post-race interviews, Magnussen was quite upset about how penalties are given out, 5 seconds versus 10-second penalties. And of course, he's frustrated that he's missing out on one of the races of the season, because he's not going to have that many more races, since as of right now, he's not going to be joining us next year for the 2025 F1 season. So let me know in the comments below what you think about these penalties. Do you think they're getting a little bit harsh? Do you think it was appropriate how they were divvied up this time around? Let me know your thoughts. Moving on to number 3. This was a big race where usually it's just a one-stop race. However, things were a little bit different this time around. We had people or teams constantly talking about whether or not they should do one-stop race. Should they do two-stop races? Pretty early on, we knew that Red Bull, both cars will be doing two-stop races, because for their first pit stop, they didn't change their tire compound. And as you know, all teams and all cars are required to change the tire compound once during the race, otherwise they'll be disqualified. So we knew immediately Red Bull will be doing a 2 pit stop. But what about McLaren and Ferrari? McLaren for the longest time was trying to just do the 1 pit stop, but there was a lot of graining on their left front tire. Of course, because of the track layout. So they ended up making the call to do a second pit stop for both drivers, which at the end might have not been the best call. I mean, you don't know. You don't know how it really would have ended. They could have risked it maybe with Piastri leaving him ahead because he was ahead of Charles Leclerc at that point by several seconds. I think at that point he was around like 5 to 6 seconds ahead when he went into the pit. So he could have maybe risked it, but Ferrari took that risk. Even after the first, or going into the first pit stop, Sainz was on the radio and said it's a little too early to go into the pits. And you know, Sainz is smart. He's really good at strategy. He's good at forward thinking. So there was already some indication that maybe Ferrari will be sticking it out for just a one pit stop, and they did that indeed. I do wish we would have had Ruth this time around with some more strategy inputs during the race to maybe explain it a little bit more, because I do truly love her input during the races if you watch F1 TV. Number 4, I do have to say Franco Colapinto is a great addition to the F1 grid. He had an excellent first race. He started in 16th position. He ended up in 12th position. Of course, the penalty for Danny Ricciardo ended up helping him and elevating him to one more position. Nonetheless, he rode an excellent race. There was a lot of thinking needed, a lot of strategy needed, a lot of experience from the drivers needed to apply during the race, and he did that on his own. Of course, he's a little bit more familiar with the Monza track, so going forward, it's going to be interesting since he'll be driving on tracks that he's not very familiar with quite yet. So he said in his post-race interview that he will have to do a lot of preparing, a lot of simulation, so he can adapt to those new racetracks. I definitely wish him all the best moving forward. This was his first out of 9 races for the season. As you know, he's replaced Logan Sargent, and so far, dare I say, he did better than Logan Sargent, or maybe we shouldn't compare them. They're 2 different drivers, 2 different people. So Franco Colapinto did great on his own, and I'm excited to see if he will be able to earn a point or 2 for the remainder of the season, which is a huge undertaking because you know those last couple of points, they're very, very hard to come by. So let's see if he will be able to sneak into the top 10 at one of these races and earn a point or 2. Next up, before we talk about the end of the race, I wanted to share an honorable mention with you. Oscar Piastri, his post-race interview was definitely my favorite. Without spoiling too much, he was not the happiest at the end of the race. Some of the decisions, he also took the blame on himself that some of the decisions weren't necessarily the best potentially. However, he did say that at the end, he was obstructed by some of the drivers, and he even called out Lance Stroll and said that he drove like it was his very first go-kart race.
A few people that weren't very helpful. Stroll was driving like he was in his first go-kart race, so that cost a couple of seconds.
And the 5th highlight of the race, my favorite highlight of the race, because it was unexpected, and I'm so thrilled that it happened. But for that, I need to do a quick outfit change. Here we go. Ferrari won. Charles Leclerc ended up taking the win. He did the one pit stop. It worked out for him. Oscar Piastri, who was chasing him, needed just a couple more laps, and maybe then there would have been a little bit more of a fight for first place. But it worked out for Charles. He was the tire whisperer for this race. He did drive perfectly, no big mistakes. He took care of his tires well, and he was able to take the win at home for Ferrari in Monza. So congratulations to Charles, to the whole team at Ferrari, to all the Tifosis, for everybody there. I mean, I have to say, it is definitely one of my F1 bucket lists to experience a race at Monza, and hopefully that experience will include a Ferrari win, because what an experience that must have been. I mean, if you watched the podium ceremony, you could hear the whole crowd just singing the national anthem, cheering for Charles Leclerc, chanting his name, even just the last couple of laps. Every time you could see Charles or just hear Charles coming, the grandstands, all the audience members were going crazy, understandably so, because going into this race, we didn't necessarily expect Ferrari to win this race. Overall, I think McLaren has been a favorite, But I do have to say, McLaren has not been getting the strategies quite right for winning races. I think they're not used to making those winning strategy calls quite yet. They're good at strategy, but strategies, I think, for winning races is maybe just a little bit different. And it worked out for Charles. I mean, I'm so happy for him. The 2 races he won this season are his home race at Monaco and his other home race in Monza. And I was very impressed by his Italian radio message and also post-race interview. I mean, I don't speak Italian, but it sounded very fluent to me. And yeah, what a race. I'm personally very excited. It was unexpected. I always cheer for Ferrari because if you've been following our channel, you might already know that Michael Schumacher was our first F1 hero. I mean, because we're German, and then of course he was in the Ferrari for majority of his career. So there's a very special place in my heart for Ferrari. So yeah, it was an excellent race. I think the big talking point now after this race is McLaren. So the final podium ended up being Charles Leclerc, Piastri, and then Lando. So the question is, why didn't they switch Lando and Piastri at the end? Yes, there was a little bit of a gap because Piastri had excellent pace. He rode excellently. He drove excellently. He ended up passing Sainz. Of course, Lando did eventually too. They had a little bit of different pit strategies, but why didn't they change him? Lando did earn an extra point for fastest lap that he got at the end. However, if they would have switched the drivers, if they would have made the team call, Lando would have gotten an additional 2 points, which could help him potentially for the driver championship. So the question is, why didn't McLaren make that call? I understand that during the race, it was Papaya Rules. They could race as long as it was clean, no touching. So that's all well and good for. But at the end, I mean, a difference between a second and third place for a driver, dare I say, is not the end of the world because they all want to win. So I understand that they don't want to take a win away from Piastri, but he was already very disappointed with second place. So why not switch them around, give Lando the extra point to give him a fighting chance for the driver championship, because every point counts. Now we only have 8 rounds left. Next one is going to be in Azerbaijan, in Baku, and we know Charles is actually pretty good on that track as well. And we'll see if the Red Bull will be better next time around. They said they've had some engine issues this time as well. I mean, Verstappen ended up coming in 6th, and then Perez came in 8th. So they were not where we usually find himself, or at least Max wasn't where we usually find him. So I don't know if this was the best call. I mean, if you saw Will Buxton post-race interview, he was furious about it. Like, why didn't McLaren make that call? But we don't know. I'm sure they had maybe even some awkward post-race debriefs and chats. Maybe they will make different calls in the future, but maybe that was already too late for Lando Norris. I mean, let me know in the comments what you think about that. Should McLaren have made that call? Let me know also what you thought about the race. I thought it was a fun race. I think the whole race was pretty exciting because you really didn't know with the different strategy options. And then also, of course, if Oscar Piastri will be able to pick off Leclerc again. I mean, I thought it was a solid race for Formula One. And I'm excited for in 2 weeks, we'll be at Baku on the street circuit in Azerbaijan. So tune in for that. And then for tomorrow, I have the MotoGP recap in the Spain race that happened this weekend. We had the sprint and the feature race, so we'll talk about that tomorrow. I'll give you my highlights of the race. But for now, thank you so much for tuning in. Please remember to give us a like and a subscribe, and we'll see you guys again here tomorrow at the Daily Racing Show. Bye-bye.